The white walls of Jinju Hospital seemed colder than usual that morning as Dr. Lee walked down the corridor toward room 304. His footsteps echoed heavily, carrying the weight of the news he had to deliver. Inside the room, 11-year-old Chen Xiaoshan lay on his bed, his mother Zhao Lu sitting beside him, gently stroking his hand. The boy's once energetic face had grown pale over the past months, but his eyes still held a spark of life that had amazed the hospital staff since his admission 2 years ago. The brain tumor, discovered when he was just 9, had been fought with every treatment available, but recent scans showed what Dr. Lai had feared most. The tumor had grown significantly. Zhao Liu noticed Dr. Li's entrance first, quickly wiping away the tears she hadn't meant for anyone to see. She had been spending sleepless nights in the hospital, dividing her time between her son's bedside and her own dialysis treatments 3 times a week. The irony of their situation wasn't lost on anyone, a mother and son both fighting serious illnesses under the same hospital roof. "Good morning, Chen," Dr. Lai said warmly, trying to mask the heaviness in his heart. The boy responded with a weak smile, one that still managed to light up the room. Over the past 2 years, Chen had become known throughout the hospital for his bright spirit and determination. Even when the chemotherapy made him sick, he would try to cheer up other young patients in the children's ward. Dr. Lei pulled up a chair and sat down, his clipboard clutched tightly in his hands. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the busy streets of Jinju continued their daily rhythm, unaware of the life-changing conversation about to take place within these walls. "Mrs. Zhou," Dr. Lai began, his voice gentle but professional, "could we speak privately for a moment?" Zhao Lu glanced at her son, who had already drifted back to sleep, exhausted from his morning medications. She nodded and followed Dr. Li to the corridor. The doctor led her to a small consultation room, its walls adorned with medical charts and health awareness posters. As they sat down, Dr. Li took a deep breath. In his 20 years of medical practice, these conversations never got easier. "The latest scan results came back this morning," he explained, laying out the brain images on the desk between them. "The tumor has grown more aggressive than we anticipated. It's pressing on critical areas of Chen's brain, and..." He paused, watching Zhou Lu's hands begin to tremble. "I'm very sorry, but the treatments are no longer working." Zhao Lu's world seemed to stop spinning at that moment. The fluorescent lights above buzzed loudly in the silence that followed. Outside the window, a bird landed on the windowsill, its free movement a stark contrast to the heaviness that filled the room. How long?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "A few weeks, maybe a month," Dr. Li replied softly. "We can make him comfortable, manage his pain, but medically, there's nothing more we can do to stop the tumor's growth." Zhao Liu's body shook with silent sobs. The cruel twist of fate seemed unbearable. She was already struggling with her failing kidneys, and now her only child, her precious son, was slipping away. Dr. Li placed a compassionate hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. As Zhao Lu tried to process the devastating news, a nurse rushed into the consultation room. "Dr. Lai, Chen is asking for his mother. He's awake and seems distressed." They hurried back to room 304, where Chen was sitting up in bed, his small face scrunched with concern. "Mom," he called out as soon as he saw Zhao Lu. "Why are you crying? Does your kidney hurt again?" Even in his condition, Chen's first thought was for his mother's well-being. Zhao Lu quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile, sitting down beside him. "No, sweetheart, I'm fine. Just a little tired." Dr. Lai watched from the doorway as mother and son held each other, their love filling the sterile hospital room with warmth. He had seen many powerful moments in his career, but there was something special about Chen, a wisdom and strength that seemed far beyond his 11 years. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden light across the hospital room, none of them could have known that this was just the beginning of a story that would touch hearts across the world. A story of sacrifice, love, and the incredible spirit of a little boy who would soon make a decision that would leave doctors bowing in respect and admiration. 2 floors below Chen's room, in the hospital's nephrology department, Zhao Lu sat in a cold metal chair, watching as the dialysis machine cleaned her blood. The rhythmic humming of the machine had become a familiar sound over the past year, marking the 3 days each week she spent tethered to it for 4 hours at a time. Dr. Wang, the kidney specialist, approached her station with a concerned look on his face. He had been monitoring Zhao Lu's condition for months, watching as her kidney function steadily declined despite their best efforts. The strain of caring for her sick child while managing her own illness had taken a visible toll on her body. "Mrs. Zhao," Dr. Wang said, pulling up a chair beside her, "we need to discuss your latest test results." He opened her medical file, pointing to several numbers that had been steadily worsening. "Your kidney function has dropped to below 15%. We need to start seriously considering a transplant." Zhao Lu barely reacted to the news, her thoughts still with her son 2 floors above. She had been expecting this conversation. The increasing frequency of her symptoms and the bone-deep exhaustion that plagued her had made it clear that dialysis alone wouldn't be enough forever. "The waiting list for a kidney in Jinzhou is long," Dr. Wang continued, his voice gentle but firm. "We need to start the process now. Have you spoken with any family members about potential donation?" The question hung heavy in the air. Zhao Lu's family was small, her parents were too old to be donors, and her husband had passed away in an accident years ago. She had no siblings, and her extended family lived far away in rural areas. "I can't think about this right now," Zhao Lu whispered, her voice trembling. "My son needs me. Chen is." Her voice broke as she thought of the news she had received earlier that morning about his condition. Dr. Wang leaned forward, his face filled with compassion. "I understand your son is very ill, Mrs. Zhou, but you need to take care of yourself too. Without a transplant, your condition will continue to deteriorate." The dialysis machine beeped, marking another cycle complete. Through the window, Zhou Lu could see other patients in similar chairs, some reading books, others sleeping, all fighting their own battles. She remembered how Chen would sometimes sit with her during these sessions, telling her stories about the adventures he planned for them once they both got better. A nurse entered the room, carrying Zhou Lu's daily medication. She had gotten to know all the nephrology staff well over the past year. They had become like a second family, supporting her through the difficult days when balancing her treatments with Chen's care seemed impossible. "Your blood pressure is still too high," the nurse noted, checking the machine's readings. "You need to rest more, Mrs. Zhou. The stress isn't good for your condition." Zhao Liu nodded absently, but they all knew she wouldn't rest. How could she, when her child needed her? She would continue pushing herself, traveling between floors, splitting her time between her own treatments and Chen's bedside. Dr. Wang made some notes in her file before speaking again. "We'll start the evaluation process for the transplant list today, but I want you to understand something, Mrs. Zhou." He waited until she met his eyes. "Without a living donor, the wait could be years, and in your condition." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Zhao Lu understood the implications. Her body was wearing down, the constant cycle of dialysis taking its toll. The medication costs for both her and Chen had depleted their savings, and the physical and emotional strain was becoming unbearable. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dialysis unit, Zhou Liu closed her eyes, remembering happier times. Chen is a toddler, taking his first steps. His first day of school, wearing a backpack almost as big as he was. The way he would laugh when they played in the park near their home. Now, both their lives had been reduced to hospital rooms, medical procedures, and the constant worry about what tomorrow would bring. Little did Zhao Liu know that fate had a plan in motion, one that would intertwine her journey with her sons in a way that would break her heart and save her life all at once. As she sat there, connected to the machine that kept her alive, she couldn't have imagined the decision that would soon face her, or the incredible sacrifice her young son would choose to make. The hospital conference room was unusually quiet that afternoon as Dr. Lai and Dr. Wang sat across from each other, reviewing medical files spread across the table. They had just made a discovery that would change multiple lives forever, and neither doctor knew quite how to proceed with the information. "Chen's blood type matches his mother's perfectly," Dr. Wang said, double-checking the lab results. "And his kidney size would be adequate for transplantation." He looked up at his colleague, the weight of what they were discussing visible in his expression. Dr. Li rubbed his tired eyes. "The boy's condition is terminal. We're looking at days, maybe a week at most." He paused, letting out a heavy sigh, but suggesting organ donation to a mother who's about to lose her child. The two doctors sat in silence, the only sound being the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant hospital announcements. Outside their window, the sun was setting over Jinzhou, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. We'd have to present the option, Dr. Wang finally said. Not just for Zhao Lu's sake, Chen's organs could save multiple lives. He gathered the papers into a neat pile. The question is, who's going to talk to her? After much discussion, they decided to approach Zhao Lu together. They found her in Chen's room, where she always was these days. Chen was sleeping peacefully, his breathing shallow but steady. The machines monitoring his vital signs beeped softly in the background. Mrs. Zhao, Dr. Lai spoke gently. Could we speak with you outside for a moment? Zhao Lu looked reluctantly at her sleeping son before following the doctors to the familiar consultation room. The same room where, just days ago, she had learned about Chen's terminal prognosis. Now she was about to face another conversation that would shake her world to its core. Dr. Wang started carefully. Mrs. Zhou, we've made a discovery that we need to discuss with you. It's about both you and Chen. He glanced at Dr. Lai before continuing. We found that Chen would be compatible as a donor for you. The words hung heavy in the air. Zhao Lu's face went pale as she understood what they were suggesting. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, I can't. I won't. Please, just listen, Dr. Lei interjected softly. We know this is impossibly difficult, but Chen's condition is terminal, and his organs could save not just your life, but others as well. Zhao Lu stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You want me to sacrifice my son to save myself? Her voice was filled with horror and disbelief. We're not asking you to sacrifice anything, Dr. Wang explained gently. Chen's condition is beyond our help now. This would be his final gift, a chance to save his mother and help others. Tears streamed down Zhao Lu's face as she paced the small room. He's just a child. My child. How can I even think about this? The doctors watched as she struggled with the impossible decision before her. Outside, the sky had grown dark, and the city lights twinkled through the window. In the distance, a siren wailed, reminding them of other lives hanging in the balance. There are currently 3 other patients in critical condition who could benefit from organ donation, Dr. Lai said quietly. A young girl Chen's age needs a liver. A father of 2 needs a heart. Your son could give them all a second chance at life. Zhao Lu collapsed back into her chair, her body shaking with sobs. I need time, she managed to say between tears. I need to think. The doctors nodded understandingly. As they stood to leave, Dr. Wang placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Take all the time you need, but remember, Chen's condition is deteriorating rapidly. If donation is to be possible. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Zhao Lu understood that time was running out, not just for her son, but for the decision that now weighed heavily on her shoulders. As she made her way back to Chen's room, her steps heavy with the burden of what she had just learned, Zhao Lu had no idea that fate had one more twist in store. The decision she was agonizing over would soon be taken out of her hands by the remarkable wisdom and courage of her young son. But for now, she sat beside his bed, watching him sleep, torn between her desperate need to keep him with her and the knowledge that his passing could bring life to others, including herself. The morning sun had barely risen when Chen Xiaoshan woke up, finding his grandmother sitting beside his bed instead of his mother. His head was hurting more than usual, but there was something different about his expression, a determination that hadn't been there before. Grandmother? Chen said softly, his voice weak but clear. Where is Mom? Is she at dialysis again? Lei Chen, his grandmother, nodded, gently adjusting his pillow. She had been taking turns with her daughter-in-law to watch over Chen, witnessing both mother and grandson fight their separate battles with illness. Grandmother, I heard the doctors talking yesterday, Chen continued, his young face showing wisdom far beyond his 11 years. They were outside my room. They said Mom needs a kidney, and, he paused, gathering his courage, and mine would work. Li Chen froze, her heart skipping a beat. The doctors had sworn they would keep the discussion private until Zhao Lu made her decision. They hadn't counted on Chen being awake and alert enough to overhear them. My dear child, his grandmother started, but Chen interrupted her. I'm not going to get better, am I? He asked the question without fear, simply seeking confirmation of what he had already understood. The silence that followed was answer enough. Chen looked out the window, watching as birds flew past. If I'm going to die anyway, he said slowly. I want Mom to have my kidney. I want to save her. Li Chen's eyes filled with tears as she listened to her grandson's words. Here was this young boy, facing his own mortality with more courage than most adults could muster, thinking only of how he could help others. Mom won't agree, Chen continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. She'll say no because she loves me too much. But grandmother, you have to help me convince her, please. The elderly woman took her grandson's small hand in hers, feeling its fragility. Chen, you don't have to do this. Your mother wouldn't want you to worry about her. But I do worry, Chen replied, squeezing her hand. Every time she goes for dialysis, every time I see her looking tired and sick, I worry all the time. He turned his head to look directly at his grandmother. I learned in school that people can live with one kidney, but Mom has none that work. She needs one more than I do now. A nurse entered the room to check Chen's vital signs, noticing the serious conversation taking place. She had grown fond of the brave young patient over the past months, always amazed by his positive attitude despite his condition. Uncle Wang from down the street, Chen continued after the nurse left. He died waiting for a new liver last year. I don't want Mom to die waiting for a kidney when I could give her mine. Li Chen stroked her grandson's head gently, marveling at the depth of his understanding and the size of his heart. Your mother would rather die herself than take anything from you, she said softly. That's why we have to make her understand, Chen insisted. Grandmother, promise me you'll help. Promise me you'll convince her. His voice grew more urgent. I don't have much time left, I can feel it. But Mom can still live for many years if she gets my kidney. The morning light grew stronger, filling the room with a warm glow. Outside, the hospital was coming to life with the day shift arriving and visitors starting to trickle in. But in room 304, time seemed to stand still as grandmother and grandson shared this profound moment. You're very brave, Chen, Li Chen finally said, her voice thick with emotion. Your mother and I are so proud of you. Then you'll help? Chen asked, hope filling his tired eyes. Li Chen nodded slowly, knowing this would be both the hardest and most important promise she would ever keep. Yes, my dear boy, I'll help you convince your mother. Chen smiled, looking relieved. Thank you, grandmother. He closed his eyes, exhausted from the conversation, but peaceful in knowing he had set his final plan in motion. As Li Chen watched her grandson drift back to sleep, she marveled at how someone so young could possess such wisdom and selflessness. She knew the difficult conversations that lay ahead, but she also knew that Chen's decision, made with pure love and understanding, would change not just his mother's life, but the lives of many others as well. The hospital chapel was empty except for Zhao Lu, who knelt in front of the small altar, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She had just come from another heated discussion with her mother-in-law and the doctors about Chen's wish to donate his organs. The weight of the decision felt like it was crushing her heart. I can't do it, she had told them repeatedly. I can't agree to this. He's my son, my only child. But now, alone in the chapel's silence, Zhao Liu remembered the look in Chen's eyes when he had finally confronted her himself earlier that morning. His voice had been weak, but determined as he spoke words that would forever echo in her memory. Mom, he had said, reaching for her hand, I know you're scared. I'm a little scared too. But I'm more scared of leaving and not being able to help you. His small fingers had intertwined with hers, still showing strength despite his failing body. A soft knock on the chapel door interrupted Zhao Lu's thoughts. It was Li Chen, her mother-in-law, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. The elderly woman sat beside her daughter-in-law, offering her one of the cups. He's asking for you again, Li Chen said gently. He won't rest until he knows you've agreed. Zhao Lu stared into her tea, watching the leaves swirl at the bottom. How can he be so brave? She whispered. He's just a child, but he's showing more courage than I am. Because he loves you, Li Chen replied simply. And because he understands something that perhaps we adults sometimes forget. That love means doing what's best for others, even when it hurts us. The 2 women sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the distant hospital announcements and the quiet hum of activity beyond the chapel doors. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows, creating patterns of colored light on the floor. The doctors say he's in pain, Li Chen continued softly. He's hiding it from you, but he suffers more each day. He wants his last act to mean something. To help you live. Zhao Lu's hands trembled around her teacup. But how will I live with myself, knowing that I agreed to this? How will you live with yourself if you don't? Li Chen countered gently. This is his wish, his choice. He wants to be your hero, Zhao Lu. Will you deny him that? Fresh tears rolled down Zhao Lu's cheeks as she remembered all the times Chen had asked about her kidney treatments, his young face filled with worry. Even in his worst moments, he had always been concerned about her health more than his own. A nurse appeared at the chapel door. Mrs. Zhou, Chen is awake. He's asking for you. Zhao Lu stood slowly, her legs feeling weak. Lai Chen took her arm, supporting her as they made their way back to Chen's room. With each step, Zhou Lu felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but also felt a growing understanding of what she needed to do. They found Chen propped up in his bed, looking out the window at the birds flying past. When he saw his mother, his face lit up with a smile that still managed to brighten the room despite his condition. "Mom," he said softly, "have you thought about what I asked?" Zhao Lu sat on the edge of his bed, taking his small hand in hers. She looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw not just a child, but a soul wise beyond its years, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice out of love. "Yes, Chen," she finally answered, her voice barely a whisper. If this is what you truly want, I will respect your wish." The relief and joy that spread across Chen's face made the decision both easier and harder to bear. He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "Thank you, Mom," he said. "Now I know you'll be okay, and maybe—" He paused, his eyes showing a glimmer of his old mischievous spirit. "Maybe a part of me will always be with you." Zhao Lu gathered her son in her arms, holding him close, feeling his heart beat against hers. In that moment, she understood that sometimes the greatest act of love a parent can show is not in protecting their child from death, but in honoring their child's wish to give life to others. Outside the window, a single white dove landed on the sill, as if bearing witness to this final act of love between mother and son. The hospital corridors had never seemed so long or so quiet. It was early morning, and a solemn atmosphere hung in the air of Jinzhou Hospital's third floor. The usual bustle of nurses, doctors, and patients had come to a complete standstill. Instead, hospital staff lined both sides of the hallway leading to the operating room, their heads bowed in respect. Dr. Lai stood at the beginning of the corridor, his surgical mask hanging around his neck. He had performed countless procedures in his career, but none had affected him quite like this one was about to. Behind him, more medical staff gathered, forming two perfect lines along the walls. In room 304, Zhou Lu sat beside Chen's bed one last time. Her son had slipped into a coma the previous evening, his body finally giving in to the tumor that had fought so hard against. The machines that had kept track of his life for so many months beeped softly, marking these final moments. "It's time," Dr. Wang said gently from the doorway. "The operating room is ready." Two nurses approached with a gurney, their movements gentle and respectful. With infinite care, they transferred Chen's small body from his bed. Zhao Lu watched, her hands clasped tightly together, her tears falling silently. "Wait," she whispered, leaning down to kiss her son's forehead one last time. "I love you, my brave boy. I love you so much." Lei Chen, standing behind her daughter-in-law, placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. Together, they watched as the nurses began to wheel Chen's gurney toward the door. As they emerged into the hallway, both women gasped. Neither had expected the sight that greeted them. The entire corridor, stretching all the way to the operating room, was lined with hospital staff. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, technicians. Everyone who had known Chen or been touched by his story stood in silent tribute. The gurney began its final journey down the corridor. As it passed, each member of the staff bowed deeply, an unprecedented show of respect for this young boy who had touched so many lives during his time in the hospital. Among them was Nurse Jian, who had often brought Chen extra pudding cups when he was having difficult days. She wiped tears from her eyes as she bowed, remembering his bright smile whenever she entered his room. Dr. Chen from Pediatrics bowed next, recalling how the boy had always tried to cheer up other young patients, even when he was feeling sick himself. Despite his own pain, Chen had never lost his desire to help others. The hospital's chief surgeon, who rarely appeared on the regular floors, stood with the others, bowing deeply as the gurney passed. He had heard of Chen's remarkable decision and had come to pay his respects to this extraordinary young soul. Even the hospital cleaning staff, who had gotten to know Chen during their early morning rounds when he couldn't sleep, stood in line, bowing with the same deep respect as the highest-ranking doctors. The sound of wheels rolling softly against the floor echoed in the silence. No phones rang. No announcements came over the speakers. The entire hospital seemed to hold its breath as Chen made his final journey. Zhao Liu and Li Chen followed behind the gurney, overwhelmed by this spontaneous display of honor and respect. They had known Chen was special, but seeing how many lives he had touched, how many hearts he had breached, made their loss feel both heavier and somehow more meaningful. As they approached the operating room doors, Dr. Lai and Dr. Wang stepped forward to take their positions. The operating room team waited inside, all of them volunteers who had asked to be part of this special case. Before the doors opened, the entire hallway of staff bowed one final time in perfect unison. It was a moment that would be remembered and spoken about in the hospital for years to come. The day when an entire hospital stopped to honor an 11-year-old boy who had shown them all the true meaning of courage and sacrifice. Zhao Liu kissed her son's forehead one last time before the operating room doors opened. "Goodbye, my brave little hero," she whispered. As Chen disappeared behind the operating room doors, the hospital staff remained in their positions, heads bowed, each lost in their own thoughts about the remarkable young boy who had reminded them all why they had chosen careers in healthcare: to save lives, to help others, and to witness the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit, even in its youngest vessels. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, casting a gentle glow over the scene, as if heaven itself was acknowledging this moment of profound respect and honor. The operating room at Jinsu Hospital buzzed with focused energy as multiple surgical teams worked with precise coordination. Each movement was carefully choreographed, each second precious in this race to preserve and transfer life. Dr. Lai led the primary team, his experienced hands moving with practiced precision. In the waiting room, Zhao Liu sat motionless, her mother-in-law holding her hand tightly. The clock on the wall seemed to move impossibly slowly as they waited for news. Around them, other families waited for their own news about different surgeries, unaware they were sitting near someone whose son was giving the ultimate gift. 3 other operating rooms had been prepared. In one, a 21-year-old girl named Mingwei waited with her parents nearby, hoping for the liver transplant that would save her life. In another, a father of 2 young children was being prepared to receive a new heart. The third room stood ready for Zhao Liu's own kidney transplant. Dr. Wang appeared in the waiting room doorway, still wearing his surgical scrubs. "Mrs. Zhou, it's time for your preparation." His voice was gentle but firm. Zhao Liu looked up, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "The other recipients?" she whispered. "Are they ready?" "Yes," Dr. Wang nodded. "Everything is proceeding as planned. Chen's." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Chen's final gifts are being prepared for transplant now." Li Chen squeezed her daughter-in-law's hand. "Go. This is what Chen wanted. Don't let his sacrifice be in vain." Zhao Liu allowed herself to be led to the preparation room. As the nurses helped her change into a hospital gown, she could hear the quiet efficiency of the hospital staff coordinating the multiple transplant procedures. Each team had volunteered to be part of this extraordinary chain of events. In the first operating room, Dr. Lai and his team had completed their initial work. Chen's organs had been preserved perfectly, a final gift from a child whose courage would save multiple lives. The liver was carefully transported to where Mingwei waited. Her parents, who had watched their daughter suffer through liver failure for 3 years, held each other as they saw the medical team rushing past with the precious organ. The heart, strong and young, was rushed to the father whose own heart had been failing for years. His wife, watching from behind a glass window, pressed her hands against the cold surface as she saw hope being carried into her husband's operating room. Zhao Liu lay on the operating table, the anesthesiologist preparing to put her to sleep. Dr. Wang stood beside her, his hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder. "Your son's kidney is perfect," he told her softly. "Strong and healthy. It will serve you well." Tears slipped from the corners of Zhao Liu's eyes as the anesthesia began to take effect. Her last conscious thought was of Chen's smile, and his insistence that this was what he wanted. Hours passed as the surgical teams worked tirelessly. In a hospital chapel, Li Chen lit candles and prayed, for her grandson's soul, for her daughter-in-law's recovery, and for all the others whose lives were being saved by one boy's incredible gift. Finally, as evening approached, Dr. Wang emerged from Zhou Lu's operating room. His tired face broke into a smile as he approached Lei Chen. The surgery was successful, he announced. The kidney has begun functioning perfectly. Zhou Lu is in recovery now. Similar news came from the other operating rooms throughout the evening. Ming Wei's new liver was functioning well. The father's heart was beating strongly in his chest. Chen's final gifts had all found their new homes. In the recovery room, Zhou Lu slowly awoke from her surgery. As consciousness returned, she placed a hand over the spot where her son's kidney now lived within her. Through her grief, she felt a profound connection. A part of Chen would live on, not just in her, but in others who had received his precious gifts. Outside the hospital windows, the sun was setting over Jinzhou. In 3 different recovery rooms, 3 lives had been saved. 3 families had been given second chances, and though one family grieved the loss of their precious son and grandson, they found comfort in knowing that his final wish had been fulfilled. His mother would live, and his sacrifice had saved not just her, but others as well. As night fell, the hospital settled into its quiet rhythms, but something had changed. In its halls woke living testaments to the power of one child's love and courage. A mother carrying her son's kidney, a young woman with a new liver, and a father whose heart now beat with renewed strength, all connected forever by the incredible gift of an 11-year-old boy. 1 month after Chen Taoshan's remarkable gift of life, the story began to spread beyond the walls of Jinzhou Hospital. It started with a local newspaper reporter who had heard whispers of the young boy who had saved multiple lives. The article, titled "The Little Hero of Jinzhou," appeared on the front page of the city newspaper. It detailed Chen's brave decision, the unprecedented honor guard of bowing doctors, and the lives he had saved. Within days, the story was picked up by national media across China. Zhou Lu, still recovering but growing stronger each day with her son's healthy kidney, found herself receiving letters from all over the country. Parents wrote about how they had shared Chen's story with their children, teaching them about courage and selflessness. Teachers used his example in their classrooms to discuss the meaning of sacrifice and love. In the same hospital where Chen had spent his final days, Ming Wei, the young woman who received his liver, was preparing to go home. Before leaving, she asked to meet Zhou Lu. The 2 women embraced, both crying as they shared their connection to the extraordinary boy who had saved their lives. "I will honor his memory every day," Ming Wei promised, holding Zhou Lu's hands tightly. "I will live the life he gave me in a way that would make him proud." The father who had received Chen's heart brought his 2 young children to visit Zhou Lu. As she placed her hand on his chest, feeling her son's heart beating strongly within him, he told her, "My children will grow up knowing about Chen. They will know that every day I spend with them is because of your son's courage." The impact of Chen's story reached far beyond individual lives. In China, where organ donation had been historically rare due to cultural beliefs, something began to change. Hospital administrators across the country reported an increase in organ donor registrations. People cited Chen's story as their inspiration, saying if a child could understand the importance of such a gift, they could too. Li Chen, who had supported her grandson's wish despite her own grief, began volunteering at the hospital's Organ Donation Information Center. She shared Chen's story with families struggling with similar decisions, offering them not just comfort, but a powerful example of how one gift could transform many lives. Dr. Lai and Dr. Wang were invited to medical conferences to discuss the case. They spoke not just about the medical procedures, but about the profound impact one young patient had on their entire hospital staff. The image of doctors bowing in respect to a child donor became a symbol of the nobility of organ donation. 6 months after Chen's passing, Jinzhou Hospital established the Chen Taoshan Memorial Garden in their courtyard. It was a peaceful space where transplant recipients and donor families could reflect and find comfort. At its center stood a small statue of a boy with wings, his hands opened in a gesture of giving. Zhou Lu visited the garden often, finding peace in its quiet beauty. She would sit on a bench, her hand resting on her side where Chen's kidney kept her alive, and watch as other visitors read the plaque that told her son's story. Sometimes, she would see parents kneeling beside their children, explaining Chen's gift and the lives he had saved. 1 year after Chen's decision changed so many lives, a national organ donation awareness campaign was launched in China. His story was featured prominently, touching hearts across the nation and inspiring thousands to register as donors. The campaign's slogan, Love Lives On, captured the essence of Chen's legacy. In Jinju Hospital, new protocols were established for honoring organ donors, inspired by the spontaneous tribute the staff had paid to Chen. The honor walk, as it came to be known, became a standard practice across many Chinese hospitals, giving dignity and respect to those making the ultimate gift. As Zhao Lu grew stronger each day, she began speaking at schools and community centers, sharing her son's story. She would tell them about a brave 11-year-old boy who, facing his own mortality, thought only of how he could help others. She would speak of how his decision had not only saved her life, but had changed countless others by inspiring them to think differently about organ donation. Chen Xiaoshen's legacy lived on not just in the lives he saved directly, but in the thousands of lives that would be saved by those he inspired to become donors themselves. His story became more than just a tale of sacrifice. It became a catalyst for change, a testament to the power of love, and a reminder that even the youngest among us can leave an indelible mark on the world. In the end, Chen's greatest gift wasn't just the organs that saved 3 lives. It was the way his courage and compassion touched hearts across the world, creating ripples of change that would continue long after his final heartbeat.